Today, we're going to Europe, so get ready. Where in Europe? All around. You'll see here to start, we have a skyline, a silhouetted skyline of Europe, which this artist has taken a bunch of iconic buildings that are within Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Southern Europe, Northern Europe, smushed them all together to give you a bit of an architectural window into the region. And on the left, you'll see a photograph from an Instagram feed or Twitter feed, I can't remember, of a Roman aqueduct that's used as a parking spot within Malta, which is a country within Europe. And you'll see as the lecture goes on different ways that historical landscapes are incorporated into contemporary uses of space within Europe. Certainly, this is something that is done in all regions of the world. And to introduce you to the concept of reading cultural landscapes and identifying cultural landscapes, I've shown you this photograph here of Malta, and I'll have a few more in lecture. So let's dive in and let's get oriented with the region. Here is a map of Europe. There are about 44 countries in Europe. I say about because it's not standard in terms of how we define Europe precisely. Sometimes Turkey, which is not included in this rendering, here's Turkey is included within Europe, the region. Continentally, this part of Turkey is on the continental mass of Europe, whereas this portion of Turkey, the bulk of the region or the country of Turkey is on an Asian landmass, Asian continent. So it literally is split. So you'll get a couple different reads on that. But generally, it's going to include Scandinavia. You'll see Denmark, or rather, you'll see Greenland is not included on this map because Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. So for ease of representing the region, we've cut out Greenland here. So you have Scandinavian area up here. This region, Eastern Europe, typically refers to countries that were formerly under heavy Soviet influence during the Cold War. And then we have Western Europe, which includes the British Isles, the heartland here, Belgium, Germany, France, and sometimes Southern Europe. Mediterranean Europe is another sub-region within that. Has a couple different climates, temperate, continental, and highland. We'll talk about that in just a second. Quick public service announcement. Pause this slide if you need to review it. Skip ahead if you've got it. Great Britain refers to Scotland, England, and Wales. The UK extends out to include Northern Ireland. And as a whole, the island of Ireland, which includes Ireland, which is a sovereign state, and Northern Ireland, part of the UK, is referred to as the British Isles. Okay, so note that. Common misconception. People don't know what to do with that. This is a really simple graphic to help you out with that. Just quick orientation in terms of landmass that this region covers. Here you see overlaid the United States over Europe. So Europe, the entirety of it can fit within the United States, even if we change the orientation here of the U.S. and we include parts of Scandinavia. Here's India, if you're more familiar with that region of the world, overlaid. So obviously a lot of this country is covering ocean as well. And here's Russia, which is massively larger than this region of the world. And that's interesting, right? Because if we have about 195 countries in the world, that 44 of them are in this region, the European region, and a country like Russia is, multiple times bigger, and so it's a single country. So as we move forward and learn about different regions, it's always important to kind of think about what are the benefits to being a large country, what are the challenges to being a large country, and vice versa. And so Europe, being relatively a small world region with an abundance of sovereign nations, gives us that chance to think about it. We go back to climate. We can see here climate map of Europe and see that we have temperate climates, we have continental climates, and we also have highland climates, even polar climates within really high altitudes. Now, what's missing here a little bit is the latitude, right? We don't have latitude lines, but based on latitude alone, Europe is fairly north, especially like the British Isles up here. They should be colder based on latitude alone. And we know latitude certainly is a big aspect that affects climate, but it's not the only thing. And another really big thing that affects climate is the presence of water. So because there is so much water in Europe, there are a ton of peninsulas, so there's water in and around countries. The British Isles are islands themselves. that certainly is one thing that moderates the climate or brings the extremes down, makes them a little bit steadier. But there's another feature that affects particularly northern or western Europe that makes the climate a little bit warmer than it, quote, should be by latitude alone. And that thing or that feature is called the Gulf Stream, which is a warm water ocean current running all the way from the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of the US, all through the North Atlantic Ocean. And that's carrying with it warm water, which then affects the air around and the climate of, again, northern and western Europe. So going back to that side note about latitude, you can see here two cities that have the same latitude. So they exist on the same parallel that circumnavigates the globe. So New York City is akin to Rome, which means London, this tiny dot up here, is all the way up actually in Canada. So again, should have cooler climate than it does, but things like the Gulf Stream account for that. And here's a cool map overlaid. Pause this, zoom in if you want to take a peek. If you've been to cities in Europe and you find this particularly interesting, you can see what is done here is Europe has overlaid the U.S. in terms of latitude and position of cities. So you'll see here, it's a little small on my view, but there's Rome, and so it kind of aligns with New York here. London, all the way up here, we see in southern Canada, cities in Russia over here. So it's just kind of an interesting thing to look at when we don't look at globes as much. We miss this type of spatial awareness and knowledge. So this is a non-globe way to reiterate and drive home the point that certainly Europe is existing at a higher latitude. Some other features of the region: it has about 10% of the global population. It has a high HDI, which helps position it squarely within the core region, a core region of the world. About 74% is urban, so really high rates of urban population. Take a look at its population pyramid and always be asking yourselves, how do I characterize this? What are the traits? What does this pop pyramid tell me? Right, so it's constrictive. We can see here that the fertility rate is lower than about 2.1 kids per woman, so there's not natural replication to promote growth. Of course, migration is another factor that affects overall population. Migration is included in migrants, and out-migrants are included in this population, this slice of population. So when you think about another pressing issue that Europe is facing now in terms of migration, Syrian refugees, migrants from North Africa, that is definitely a significant way that the population is being altered. Europe is known as a core region of the world. So that means that overall it has high HDI, high GDP, and overall high levels of prosperity in comparison to other parts of the world. It is not the only core region of the world, but it's definitely a central one. So if that's the pattern, we have to ask ourselves why and how. What are the processes that help contextualize this reality? And as a side note, take a look at this map of wealth per adult and start to notice some sub-regions emerging within Europe itself. So thinking about how and why Europe has reached core status, we have to start with resource availability. Certainly having varied climates, spanning coastal, mountainous, to even flat, low-lying areas that are really good for farming, helped, right? So having varied climates and varied landscape types allows for a diverse type of society to develop and a diverse amount of food to produce to support a healthy population. Another thing that helps explain how and why Europe reached core status, and there are many different things, right? The most important thing to take away from this lecture is that there's nothing inherent about Europe or Europeans that accounts for its core status. There are a bunch of different properties and a bunch of different happenstances that coalesce together to explain its current feature of being core. Having the opportunity to grow out of early Greek and Roman empires is another feature. So patterns of travel were established, patterns of sharing knowledge were established, and even infrastructure was established very early on. Vikings and trade during the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, when there was a lack of connectivity a little bit, Vikings up in Scandinavia and making connections across the Arctic Ocean area and North Atlantic area is something that kept that kept the light in the Dark Ages, right? It maintained that little bit of connection and that little bit of growth within society. A big reason that scholars today also argue that Europe has achieved its core status is really due to the fact that it is a politically fragmented region. Again, we have about 44, 45 countries within a relatively small geographical area of the world. Actually, the modern state system was born in this part of the world in 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia. And what that did is establish the precedent that independent groups of people and political spaces are going to respect the borders, more or less. There's always war over borders still today, unfortunately. But what that did is basically introduce a heavy dose of competition. So when you have an abundance of independent groups of people, eventually states, sovereign states competing for each other, that drives you to advance and to develop the most intricate technology, intricate agricultural technology, etc. At the same time, there was a lot of cultural continuity over this region or within this region. Latin as a common lingua franca, or a language that folks who spoke different languages could communicate in, the common influence of Christianity, etc. Colonialism and the age of exploration, another huge factor that binds this country together. When agreements were made to limit or reduce the amount of conflict between borders within Europe, folks went out of Europe. So this map shows at one point or another areas once colonized or controlled by Europe, and we can see here absolutely the vast part of the entire world. So even though Europe itself is has a smaller geographical extent in terms of territory, its import is almost unmatched. And another thing that helps explain Europe's strategic core is certainly the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, 1700s, 1800s, has pegged to Europe, particularly Western Europe, particularly the British Isles, and that really had an influence in moving a lot of folks who were living in rural spaces to urban spaces, because that's where factories popped up. So in 1800, maybe only about 9 or 10% of the population was urban, and by 2010, 2015, we're up to 74, 75%. Within only 100 years after the Industrial Revolution, we're already up to about 50%. So we've gone from maybe 10 all the way up to 75%. We can see here a few maps that are relevant to the Industrial Revolution. We see on the right here kind of the core of the IR spreading out in waves. And we see here a contemporary map of rail network of Europe, and it's color-coded by high-speed rail and low-speed rail, right? Less high-speed rail. And we start to observe a little bit of a spatial similarity in terms of how that high-speed rail radiates out. We start to see that we have a lot of high-speed rail in the kind of the core of the northwestern Europe, and it lessens a little bit as we go, certainly east. South is hit or miss, right? We definitely have a good high-speed rail here in the Iberian Peninsula. And the reason I put this up is because it once again starts to illustrate a bit of these sub-regions within Europe that have emerged. So even though all of Europe is core, there are differences in terms of the level of core within the space. So those patterns are reflected a little bit better in this map. So we can see here kind of Western Europe, British Isles, sometimes called Northwest Europe. We have the Northern or the Nordic region, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe. Mediterranean Europe or Southern Europe is kind of the one that caps it off here in the south. And these are the sub-regions within Europe, and the level to which core status is achieved generally moves from a northwest to southeast, or moves in a northwest to southeast direction. This lecture orients you with a couple key features of Europe's physiography or physical geography. You see here a photo of a fjord in Norway with big cruise ships and a little town here on the edge. Now a fjord, maybe some of you have experience having visited a fjord in Scandinavia, but it's an area where there once used to be a glacier, and subsequently that glacier has melted, it disappeared, and the valley that glacier formed is flooded with seawater. So these often go, you start in a cruise ship on the ocean, and then you go into the fjord and take a peek at what the great treasures that lie within. But you see here a couple different landscapes. So certainly we see the fjord, we see ice-capped mountains or snow-capped mountains. And if we zoomed out and took a look at where this was positioned, we would see that it is in Norway, which is part of the Scandinavian peninsula. So one of the key physiographic features of Europe itself, any part of Europe, is water, whether that's seawater, river water, or water from snow-capped mountains. Europe is known for having a lot of peninsulas, which are pieces of land surrounded by water. So here's a really clear example, right? You can have small peninsulas, big peninsulas, a country can be a peninsula, a subregion can be a peninsula, or you can have a little peninsula within a country. It's the Sagres, Portugal, which is actually the point where Henry the Navigator departed to explore West Africa a couple centuries ago. And a navigation school was set up here precisely because it afforded a good point of departure. It had really deep ocean entrance points, so it was easy to dock a ship and to depart from this area. Good visibility, good place for a lighthouse, etc. And this is where that's located right here. So think about what being located on a peninsula affords. It just gave you some clues, right? Not only do you have good visibility and ship docking, it can also be really strategic for war. So if you set up command in this area, you have access to defend from all sides. Equally, it can be bad for war and bad for defense if you are cut off and isolated on a peninsula. So the main peninsulas. Take a look at this map, see if you can figure it out. Generate in your head. There are 4, 5, 6 peninsulas here, and they are Scandinavian, which is up here, the Jutland, which refers to Denmark and a couple areas within Germany, Iberian, Spain, Portugal, the Italian peninsula down here, aka the Boot, which we all know and love, and the Greek or the Balkan Peninsula. So Greek Peninsula, which includes parts of the Balkans as well. So this little pass-through here, which is separating Western and Eastern Turkey, actually makes the broader part here, Bulgaria and even parts of Romania, part of a peninsula as well. And the Crimean Peninsula, which you'll see here is hashed out on this map because it is an area of under active contestation between the Ukraine and Russia, but that also is one of Europe's peninsulas. So images of water, right? We have cruises in Europe going around the Greek and Balkan Peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula, Italian. These are from travel websites, so certainly having access to water also provides the opportunity to create economies around that water, whether it be fishing, and that influences the diet, which it does, or tourism as well is another thing that having access to water affords. There are a healthy network of rivers within Europe, deep rivers mostly. So you have a couple here. I'd be familiar with a couple of these. So you can speak to one or two of the main rivers in Europe. So the Seine, the Elbe, the Danube. These are all rivers within Central Europe. Also, a bunch of river cruises. So if you know someone who's been on a riverboat tour, a river cruise of Europe, this is something really common because of the healthy and robust network of rivers within mostly Central Europe, but you'll see on that other map, not only Central Europe. So they're really navigable, and having a lot of rivers has helped historically and still today facilitate interaction between and among various European countries and increase transportation as well. I put up here a few photos. I want to just give a shout out or a nod to what we call reading cultural landscapes. And that has to do with understanding why there are certain signatures, in this case, architectural signatures in a particular place. So you'll see here a photograph of Amsterdam, Netherlands, which has a lot of canals because the Netherlands is pretty low-lying and ocean water, seawater floods in and rivers drain into basins. You have the opportunity to divert, or rather the necessity to divert some of that water and contain it, channel it into a canal in order to still have infrastructure around it and create a central system of navigation. And so canals you see here in Amsterdam, for instance, are often lined with really flat-fronted houses. So we'll see here we do have a street and cars in this particular view. But these are also photographs from the Netherlands and Belgium, which are houses right along the water. So you'll see here's the water, and there's no place to park your car. There's no place to put a pot outside your door. And you'll also see that at the very top of some of these houses, they're often pitched, and you'll see a little pulley. This is actually a relic of a historic landscape. It's a pulley system, and now these are often converted into very expensive lofts and townhouses and gorgeous pieces of historical architecture, but they had a past life. And that past life has to do with the presence of water, the presence of canals. And so the reason that these are really flat-fronted is that they used to be warehouses, and boats along the canal used to pull up, and they would the contents of the boat would be hoisted up by a pulley into the loft space, and then it would be sold on the other side. So the other side might be a little street market or something. So I just want to give a little shout out. I myself, as I'm a cultural geographer, and I am always having an eye towards how we can read the landscape, because remember, geographers are about writing the world, right? Geography is a representative practice. Geography, writing the world, and we can subsequently read the world as well if you know what you're looking for. Another key physiographic feature in Europe, aside from water, is alpine. Alpine refers to a landscape and a climate type, highly elevated mountainous landscape, often sometimes called highland climate. It largely occurs above the tree line, so it's too cold to grow trees, but you'll see photographs if you do a quick Google search of alpine. You'll certainly see photographs of trees in that landscape. It's just kind of the entire region, starting at the tree line and moving up. Part of the polar climate family, sometimes called tundra climate, equivalent enough for the purposes of our class. But the word itself comes from the geographic region of the Alps, so southern Germany, northern Italy, and places like that. So you'll see here some photographs of the alpine landscape within various parts of Central Europe. Because it has really mountainous peaks and slope sides for infrastructure, it creates a bit of a patchwork landscape. So that's why you see here, I describe it as patchy, which is how some folks describe this landscape, because you have kind of little alcoves around the bends and down the valleys and around the next peak of little towns. Right, so this can divide people a little bit if you're not able to traverse the landscape a lot. Known for having agriculture with pastures, cows. Do a quick Google search of an alpine soundscape, and likely you'll hear cowbells ringing. So if you've been there as a tourist, or you have watched a movie where this landscape is featured, certainly The Sound of Music would be a good recognizable example for a lot of us. When you're from this region, those cowbells really will ring true for you. So there used to be glaciers up in this area. There still are, and when those glaciers melt, they run down, they create streams and lakes, big puddles essentially. So there's a host of glacial terms that you will learn in a physical geography class if you go that route. And hydropower is also something that can be common within parts of Europe due to the fact that you have really high mountains that have snow melt, and it runs down and it creates a fast-moving stream, and then that fast-moving stream, that the energy there can be harvested essentially, or rather harnessed is a better word, through hydropower infrastructure. Now, a fjord is a glacial valley that has been flooded by the sea. So fjords, you're not going to find in an alpine landscape within the Alps, because there has to be an ocean nearby for a true fjord to happen. But that is another feature associated with Europe.